Yeah. Yeah. It's the Locker Room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey. Locker Room. Yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk. Yeah, you know what we about to do. Localize every angle's what we really do. We the source. We the pulse of the city too. Landlocked. Got the game in the headlock. Localize every
Welcome to the Locker Room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610 and by the Odyssey app. I want you to subscribe, ride along, download, comment, do all that type of stuff. We're a month. I think we're exactly a month away from the start of training camp. I will be on the field at every practice. We will have players on the program, and we'll be bringing you the number one source for Texans daily digital content. And speaking of which, there was a front page story on ESPN today by one of the biggest football nerds in media, and I don't say that in a condescending manner. I say that in a complimentary manner. Bill Barnwell of ESPN, he had a piece in which he ranked the top wide receiver, tight end, and running back groups in the NFL. And according to Bill Barnwell, who does a lot of research, although I don't think that he follows the Texans as closely as maybe he did when they were a little bit more relevant not too long ago, but he has the Texans as dead last when it comes to best running back, tight end, and wide receiver arsenals. And I have a couple of questions. Number one, is he that far off? And number two, what are the reasons for optimism, and what should we be most excited about and most concerned about when it comes to the offensive weapons that CJ Stroud is going to have as the Texans quarterback? Let's start with the running backs. And Bill Barnwell mentions Dameon Pierce. He talks about his rookie season. And he brings up that they did bring in Devin Singletary and says that Devin Singletary and Mike Boone should help. However, he says there's a line between competent and third string options. Also mentions Noah Brown as well. So he doesn't seem to be too impressed with the Texans running back depth. And when Bill Barnwell says that, I do wonder, because a lot of times your eyes are trained if you follow a team closely, and I follow the Texans as close as anyone. I watch every play of the Texans games and most of them multiple times. The excitement over Devin Singletary, is that valid, or is that just the fact that Rex Burkhead is no longer the number two running back? In other words, as excited as we are about Devin Singletary, and as much as we talk about, it's going to be a nice element and it should give Dameon Pierce, kind of a second, like a second type of option, and a guy who can do maybe some stuff that Pierce does worse, better, and vice versa. Is Devin Singletary really a big signing, or is this excitement about Devin Singletary have as much to do with about how much they've neglected the running back position and running back depth the last couple of years, or when they haven't neglected it, they've completely screwed up and brought in David Johnson and expected him to be a starting running back? Furthermore, how much does it matter? Can you rely on Dameon Pierce as an every down running back? Can he be that 3-down running back? Can he be that workhorse? Because there is a lot of dismissal of Dameon Pierce last year, and I think he could have played more games had there been more to play for. But with Dameon Pierce's running style, can you rely on Dameon Pierce to carry a significant workload? And if not, is Devin Singletary, Bill Barnwell calls him just a serviceable third string type of guy. Can Devin Singletary be the guy that can maximize by minimizing Dameon Pierce, which is what I've talked about? Let's hear from Dameon Pierce. He joined the radio show in the offseason, and he was asked about his running style and how he feels this year compared to last.
I'm happy. I'm healthy. I'm excited. And I got a whole bunch of guys around me who feel the same exact way. So I'm excited to see what what we make of it. We got coming up on the tail end of OTAs. Next week be vet mini camp, and then we out for a couple weeks, and we got a couple weeks off to get our mind right, get our body right, and then we're going full steam ahead into camp. And from camp, once we get into camp is rolling, we're getting ready for the season. So I'm just excited to be around a lot of guys who kind of are in the same mindset as me, and the coaching staff as well. So it's just a great feeling to have a lot of guys excited for football, and it's a lot of reason to be excited.
We'll get to that coaching staff a little bit later on, but here's Dameon Pierce talking about his violent style, and this is where you wonder, like, is this going to hold up? And if so, or if not, if so, then maybe the need for a backup is minimized. But even with that, you need someone who can come in and change the pace. And maybe Devin Singletary can be that guy. But here's Dameon Pierce talking about his violent running style.
Man, I don't know, bro. My running style is the complete opposite of my personality. So I'm pretty sure if you ask anybody about my personality, say I'm funny, outgoing, about the chillest dude, about the coolest dudes you can meet. But when I get on the field, I don't know, dude. I'm just a different guy. When I see that other color, I see red, man. And I just be trying to fight for every yard. Every yard counts. And I'm gonna take mine whether you give it to me or not. So that's just how I play, and that's the mindset I attack it with. Every inch. I enjoy every inch I gain with that ball in my hand.
All right, so that's Dameon Pierce. Now, if Dameon Pierce can build on what he had last year and he can remain healthy and that running style can equate to being able to hand him the ball 20 times, and maybe it doesn't matter. But you wonder, like when Bill Barnwell calls Devin Singletary, he calls him a serviceable / third string option. Is he going to be wrong? Is it going to matter as much? That's something to keep in mind. But I would say when it comes to concerns of the three things that Barnwell ranked, whether it's running back, tight end, or wide receiver, I would say it's either one or two. If we're ranking the least amount of concerns, it's number one or two, along with the tight end position, which Barnwell brings up Dalton Schultz, one of the best receiving tight ends in the league the last few seasons. Dalton Schultz, Tegan Quinturiano, some of the other guys they got at tight end, Andrew Beck. That'll be interesting. I actually think that the tight end position is going to be a pleasant surprise. I think that's something that Bobby Slowick will maximize. Now, do I expect them to be like near the top of a preseason list? Probably not. But I think after the season, that's going to be one of the pleasant surprises and one of the things that I think guys like Bill Barnwell that don't follow the Texans as much will be pleasantly surprised by the tight ends. Now we get to the wide receivers, though. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. The wide receiver position for the Houston Texans has been, it's been kind of a problem the last 3 years. And there's been a few reasons why. A lot of it has been availability. A lot of it has been kind of a talent thing. And I also think there's a big issue when it comes to target share and spreading the ball out. And I'll bring up some stats going back to the last 3 years, receptions versus target share of the Texans' top wide receivers. In 2020, and this was when Deshaun's final year, Brandon Cooks had 81 catches on 119 targets. Will Fuller had 53 catches on 75, and Randall Cobb had 38 on 48. That's the most balance that we've seen with the wide receivers in the last few years. And even then, and I know Fuller getting suspended had something to do with it. But your second most receptions was 44 behind the targets, I should say, was 44 behind the leader. Now we start to see an even more disturbing trend in 2021 when Brandon Cooks had 90 catches on 134 targets, and Nico Collins had 33 catches on 60 targets. That's a hell of a gap right there. That is a hell of a gap when you look at that. That's 67. That is way too much of a gap from your wide receiver with this many receptions compared to the next most, unless you have an elite wide receiver. Now, if you have Justin Jefferson or you have one of the better wide receivers in the NFL, then that might not be as much of a gap. But when Brandon Cooks is that far ahead of your next guy, then that's a massive problem. 74 target differential and that many catches. That's not going to cut it. 67. And then your next most receptions was David Johnson at 32. So you only had 2 wide receivers that had 30 or more catches, and you didn't even have an elite number 1 receiver, and the target share was that far off. And this trend kind of continued last year where you had Brandon Cooks, despite missing the amount of games that he missed, he led your team in receptions at 57 and had the most targets, 93 to 74. And you had 3 receivers, Akins was a tight end, and Burkhead a running back, and Collins with 66 receptions. So you only had 2 receivers with over 40 catches, and one of them was Chris Moore. So the target share has got to equal out. Especially if you're going to not have a number 1 receiver. And that's going to be something that Bobby Slowick's going to have to figure out. The other thing is these wide receivers are going to have to be healthy, because if you look at another problem that the Texans have had, Fuller only played 11 games in 2020. Randall Cobb played 10. You had Nico Collins only played 14 in 2021, and he only played 10 last year. So you're going to have these receivers more healthy, and you're going to have to be able to spread the ball out a little bit more at the wide receiver position. Barnwell also brought up an interesting nugget, a couple nuggets on Nico Collins, who I'll say this right now. I'm not buying in on Nico Collins. I'm not doing it. I think Nico Collins needs to establish himself as maybe a serviceable wide receiver, maybe someone that you feel okay about being on your roster. But this notion that Nico Collins is going to develop into a solid number 1 or number 2 receiver, I'm just not buying it. I think he's a great young man. I think he works his ass off. He's the last to leave, all that type of stuff. He seems to be like the body transformation is great. But Nico Collins, and Bill Barnwell put this out there, a lot of it has to do with the quarterback play. I'm not disagreeing with that. But Nico Collins has 39 receiving yards per game, despite playing a majority of the snaps. And he has 1 game of over 70 yards. Let me put that in front of you. 39 receiving yards per game, despite playing a majority of the snaps in his appearances, and 1 game of over 70 receiving yards. We can blame the quarterback. And I think Nico Collins played better last year than his stats showed. But 1 game with over 70 receiving yards in the last 2 years, I'm not buying that. If we're talking about breakout guys, I'm looking more at the Mechis and the Tank Dells, who we haven't seen. I'm not expecting Nico Collins. Now, maybe Nico Collins can have the best season of his career, but I'm not expecting Nico Collins to have this like breakout. Oh, this is a number 1. This is a number 2 receiver. Maybe he can be the number 1 or number 2 receiver here. But as far as someone that you feel good about being your number 1 or number 2, I'm not quite there. So they're going to need to spread this out. There's going to have to be a little bit more. It's going to have to be a little bit more balanced when it comes to target share. And you're going to have a couple, 2 or 3 guys at the wide receiver position having over 40 catches, 35, 40 catches. Unless someone just solidifies himself as a number 1, and I don't expect that. I don't think it's realistic to expect that. So that's where I'm at with the wide receiver position. To answer the question that I asked at the start of this, do I think it was harsh to Bill Barnwell? Not really, but I do think that the ceiling, when it comes to producing as an offense, I think it's higher than maybe it would typically be at 32. Because I think if we did this list last year, Bill Barnwell would have had the Giants near the bottom. And I keep using the Giants as the example of teams to look at when it comes to reason of optimism for the Texans. Crappy schedule, just like the Giants. And I'm talking about the 2022 Giants versus the 2023 Texans. Crappy schedule, moderate receiving, decent running back, and a first-year offensive coordinator, which brings me to the 3 reasons for optimism for the Texans offense. Number 1, Bobby Slowick. Much like Mike Kafka was calling an offense in his first year last year, leaving Andy Reid and going to get that opportunity. Bobby Slowick's doing the same thing. He's leaving Kyle Shanahan and getting that opportunity. Giants didn't have good receivers, but they had a weak schedule, and they had an offensive coordinator in Mike Kafka who was able to spread the ball out. Bobby Slowick might be able to do that. We know where he comes from. Comes from the Kyle Shanahan pipeline. A lot of guys have had success from that Shanahan-McVay. Reason for optimism number one is Bobby Slowick, and I point to Mike Kafka last year with limited weapons offensively with the Giants. Number two, the unknown and first look. Nico Collins, there's a little bit of a body of work there. There are variables which might lead you to be a little bit more optimistic than me or Bill Barnwell is. But I prefer to look at the unknown and guys we've never seen step on an NFL field as reasons for optimism. And that's Tank Dell and John Mechie. And Bill Barnwell mentions both of those guys. Now, Tank Dell has the size question, 5'8". We really haven't seen a lot of receivers produce at 5'8", but there is decent reason for optimism with Tank Dell, and there have been a lot of good things said about him. John Mechie, Texans used a second-round pick on him. So the unknown in the first look, I'm more optimistic about that than Nico Collins. Although all these guys are going to benefit from new quarterback play, which you could put, or improved quarterback play, you hope, which you could put up there. And reason three, regardless of how you feel about these weapons, and regardless of how you feel about Devin Singletary being, third string caliber or serviceable, he's better than Rex Burkhead. And the wide receiver depth, Chris Moore was your second leading receiver last year. Chris Moore's a special teams guy. So whether you think Noah Brown is a third string serviceable guy, or you don't feel great about Robert Woods coming off the season in Tennessee where he had the torn ACL, although he did play all 17 games, or you don't feel like there's a high ceiling, I think we can all agree that there is more depth at every position. Running back, tight end, wide receiver, there's a lot more depth there. So between Slowick, the unknown, the first look, and all that, those would be the reasons for optimism. At the end of the day, I don't expect Bill Barnwell to be high on the Texans' weapons. I actually think it's a fair assessment to put him where he put him, especially because we don't know if Dameon Pierce is an every down back. Now, if Dameon Pierce were someone that you knew with 100% certainty could rush for over 1,100, 1,200 yards, and you'd actually seen it, maybe they'd be higher up on that list. But I think that's an unknown as well. And how do you balance the Singletary stuff? So I don't think Barnwell's too harsh, but I don't think that there's zero reason for optimism. I think the ceiling is higher than 32, and I think Bobby Slowick is going to be the key to the whole thing. Subscribe, like, ride along. Do you think Bill Barnwell is a big idiot? Do you think the Texans are going to shock some people? I think the overall grasp of this division is kind of screwed up in many areas. I think the Texans are going to be better than people think they're going to be. I think Jacksonville is getting kind of crowned as a team that's just going to run away with the division by 3 or 4 games. And I think Tennessee and Indianapolis, they're not as bad as a lot of people think they are. So I think this division could be a lot more exciting. And I think the Texans, depending on Bobby Slowick, depending on quarterback, could surprise some people. Appreciate everyone for riding along. Subscribe, like, ride along. What do you think about the Texans' offensive weapons? What do you think about Bill Barnwell? No matter what happens when it comes to this Texans game and it comes to the digital coverage and the coverage, we are all in this together. Appreciate you for coming through.
We the source, we the pulse of the city too. Landlocked, got the game in the headlock. Localized every time, can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not too. Plugged in daily digital on YouTube. We got taste for